All right, I work for ServiceNow in our performance support team, and I'm trying to learn the next experience and UI Builder because we're getting more and more cases with that as customers are starting to really starting to ramp up the adoption of these new tools. So what I'm going to do today is something pretty simple. I'm going to get a data resource and pull my incident records from my table. I've got about 1 million records in my instance so that I can test performance issues like this. So the first thing, you create one of these lookup records, target it at the incident table. Then we need to add in the fields that we want. I'm going to skip over this part with a little movie magic. There you go, 4 fields. Notice the default max results here is 1,000. So that's going to come into play a little bit later. Save that. Now we're going to add a repeater component. The repeater component allows you to, I'm going to put it within well, I'm going to make a header, sorry. I'm going to make a header first. So give this the name incident. Set it to smaller header, not so horsey. And now we're going to add the repeater. The repeater will allow me to put anything inside of it and map it against the result set of my incident lookup. So first I'm going to create this as the input type as a data input type, and I'm going to get the results of my incident lookup records. I'm going to do some styling on this. Got to make it look nice. Okay, now inside the repeater, whatever your next component is, that's going to get the target of the repeater. Put some styling on this, and for each result that comes back from the repeater will be one item, will be one instance of whatever component's in here. So this container component, I'm going to have one container component for each result from each of the 1,000 results. And then I'm going to make some text fields and some label fields to output the specific results of the incidents, of each incident that comes back. So we'll do the number, short description, priority, and state. So it'll kind of make like a little card with some of the details from each of the incidents. So the syntax here, you do item, value, then field name, then you either do value or you do display value. So some things like the state field, for example, their actual value is a integer, but then the display value will be something human readable. Okay, I've got those guys all hooked up. And so now they're going to dynamically be populated by whatever's in my data lookup resource. Let's go ahead and save it and test. And this takes a long time to load. So as I'm doing this, I'm thinking about performance. How do I troubleshoot these? So I'm going to show you a couple tools as we do this. The stats.do page is a very quick way to just look at what's happening on your instance. When I checked that, I didn't see any transactions happening. So I went and looked in the transactions all user module. This will show me any end user transactions that are occurring. And I've added the transaction processing time field, which gives me a picture of if there's any slow transactions on the server side. And it doesn't seem like there are. The slowest one was about 4 seconds, but my full page load here was 30 seconds. I'm using compression so it doesn't look as slow in the video, but it was about 30 seconds for this whole thing to load. So the next tool I'm going to use is the network tab in my developer tools. And I'm trying to see, sometimes not all the transactions will show up in your ServiceNow transaction log, and you can, because there's certain transactions that are super fast that are just excluded from the transaction list, but I didn't see any slow transactions. So again, this is starting to point to me to think that this is a problem on the client side. Basically, the data all came back from the server quickly, but it's taking a long time to render. So I'm going to use a tool here called the Network Next Experience Developer Tools. This is a browser extension available for Chrome. It's officially a ServiceNow supported feature. And it lets you get a picture inside the DOM, inside the seismic, ServiceNow's proprietary reactive framework that uses web components, so we can find out what's going on, see all the events, understand and possibly narrow down where this 30 seconds is going. So I've got the extension turned on. I've just showed in there some of the websites you could go to. There's two views. There's a profiler and an inspector. The profiler you have to turn on, and then you click like a refresh. There's two buttons in the upper left-hand corner. If you click the refresh, then it will load the page again for you and start recording all the events that happen after the page load. Now I'm tabbing through to see when we get to the 30-second mark, and here we go. You can see the start of a render and the end of a render taking about 30 seconds there, about 25 seconds. And there's the object, the property name that was being set with 1,000 items. So it's pretty clear it's coming from our resource lookup, and it's the rendering of those 1,000 items, putting them into the repeater that's so slow. So I'm going to drop the max results down to 10. Reload the page, there we go. Instantaneous page load. So keep that in mind. A repeater does not do well with large data sets. You want to keep it fairly small page size. But of course, that means now a lot of the records are missing. So the next thing that I'm going to do to make this kind of make things more fancy is I'm going to add well, let's do some styling to this, make it look like a card. And I'm going to add a pagination here in a moment. Oh, don't want the border there. Okay. Another tool you can use to evaluate your slow response time is the session debug SQL detailed view. You can't see the output of this in Workspace, but if you open a core UI page or a classic UI page, even one that doesn't exist, so I did duh.do, then it can output the SQL from any of the previous. It's like there's a buffer. It basically stores all of this session debug output until you open another page that supports session debug. So I was showing in there in the last screenshot. The SQL queries are very fast. It's not SQL query. We already kind of established that, but I wanted to go back and show you that tool. So here we go. We're going to add in the pagination. Uh, Now this gets us into that UI that says 1 to 10 of 1 million or whatever the total limit is. So we're going to set up our client state parameters in UI Builder. The state parameters are kind of the way that you rig everything together, the way that you keep track of whatever variables you want to store on the page. So we're going to build some client state parameters, and then we're going to hook those up to the different pieces of our components. So the pagination component has the total records. It has the page index, which, are you on page 1, page 2, page 3? Each page has a certain number of records in it. That's stored in this viewable items per page. So we're going to set up a state variable to that. So these will all then be dynamically wired up and refreshed automatically in the background. We don't have to worry about refreshing anything. All going to happen automatically. And we also need to, we don't have a count. So when you do lookup records, you get the records in the result set, but you don't get the count of total matching records. You just get 1,000 records. If there's a million matching records, you don't know. So we're going to build an aggregation query. This is a tool that's basically, it's going to use a GraphQL call in the background. It's going to hit the ServiceNow Glide Aggregate API, and it's going to return the row count. You can do other things like get the minimum, get the average, get the sort of aggregate methods. We're not going to need any of those. We're just going to get the count, and then we're going to, when that data fetch is succeeded, we're going to hook up now a event handler, which will set the client state parameter of the total records to the results of this glide aggregate. It's a little bit of a tricky syntax. You have to navigate through that JSON payload to the first entry in an array. You can see it in the community article. I listed all the steps, and so Don't have to pause the video and try and figure this all out. Look at the community article. You can copy paste from there. I changed the name of that data resource, so I needed to update it in my repeater component. Now I'm going to build a client script. This is something that can basically update my state and trigger a refresh of state based on some event that occurs. And so the event that occurs is as someone navigates through the paginator, they want to go to the next page, I'm going to now update all these state variables, which will then be also linked back to the data resource itself, because we're going to only bring back 10 in the first result, but then we want to bring in the next 10, or we want to change it instead of 10 to look at 20 or 50 records. So we need to hook up these state variables back to that initial data lookup that we have. All right, so now we're going to add these event mappings. We want one for when someone clicks the forward or backward pagination buttons, and another event handler for when someone changes the number of pages that can be viewed. Yeah, so payload value is going to be whatever comes back from the UI when someone changes that items per page. We're going to feed that into a named client parameter or client property. I can't remember what they call these things. So there you go. We've got a hooked up pagination, and we can go back and forth, full control. Unfortunately, it's pretty slow to do that count. Um, relatively slow. I've got 1 million records in this incident in my instance, and the first time I loaded it today, it took about 7 seconds. After that, it only took about 2 seconds to load the count. Uh, oh yeah, I had some trouble here with the client client script. So the payload value is from that when you page through the paginator component, pagination control component, it's going to actually return the value in that payload is going to be not the page number, so it won't be, page 2 would be uh, 11. Okay, so there we go. Got it loading. Now let's take a look at this SQL query. Go back and load our duh.do page and look for the task table. There we go, 2.6, yeah, 2.684 seconds. And hover over that, you can see it's the count star query, and we get the full stack trace, so you can go figure out, well, what called this. You can see in here it's a REST call. It's getting in the GraphQL engine. So we could even find this in the network tab and debugger tools. If we look by the time column, there you go. It's a batch call. A batch means it's a one or more REST calls batched in a single request. And if I look at the contents of this, I can see in here, we've got a sysid and then a series of JSON literal arguments. I'm going to go look in the sys metadata table. If you do this dot uppercase filter, it'll open a new tab and just the filter, so it won't query for records, which is nice because sometimes querying for records is really slow. So if you've got a large table, you want to open up just the filter navigator at the top and not actually query the records, do dot filter, table name dot filter. So here's lookup records. Yeah, so there's our proof. It's the lookup records. I think it's actually the aggregate query is what it was. So let's take a look at the, yeah, so what we're going to do is, what if we can even take care of that 2 seconds on initial load? We're going to speed that up by making it optional. So we're not going to initially load the count. We're going to let the user decide if they want to click this button to see to get the total count. So we're going to create an event. When the user clicks the button, that's going to trigger a refresh of our aggregation data resource. We need to add in here a new client parameter, tell the user to click the button if they want to see the total. There we go. Add this into the range label dynamically. And we're going to add another client script, this time, what happens when somebody clicks that button. And we're going to connect this to the end of the load of the aggregate query. So a little note here, side note, all the events in UI in the seismic framework and UI builder, all the events are totally asynchronous. So if you fire off 2 events from the same action, there's no determining which one is going to execute first. And so what I've done here is create a chain of events, and I'm only going to fire this client script after my my aggregate lookup has finished. So the button is going to fire the aggregate lookup, and then on completion of the aggregate lookup, I'm going to fire this client script. I'm going to update my other client script so we can have this fancy new range label in place. And now when I reload the page, super fast, we don't have that 2-second lag. We have the click to show count. So we got the custom label, and once I reload the whole label, bingo, I can navigate through everything. So there you have it. Thanks if you followed along to the end, and happy coding.